Service Helpline.
My mommy and daddy both work in the World Trade Centers and haven't come home yet. What should I do?
Emergency Service Helpline.
My husband is missing. He works downtown in Tower 2.
Emergency Service Helpline.
My wife is a police officer. No one's heard from her since she went in. Is there any word yet?
I have this story I tell a lot. Lots of people have a similar story, and everyone saw my story on TV to one extent or another.
If you lived or worked in New York City in September of 2001, you've been asked to talk about it a lot too. This is just one person's story.
Individual experiences get lost in the spectacle and the chaos of the towers coming down. This thing happened to me on my way to work back then.
The story starts there anyway. Most people stop at the point of getting home, maybe finding some company. When I tell it, it goes on longer. Up to a week and change later, when we all went back to work in the post-apocalyptic financial district.
We're still living the aftermath.
But now we have the benefit of hindsight.
As I was saying, this thing happened to me on the way to work. Happened to a lot of people. All things considered, I'm really one of the lucky ones.
Is it true you were really there?
So, what happened?
I worked, in the financial district in New York City. People don't necessarily realize that a lot of the grunt work of Wall Street is done by artists of some kind. At the time, I was one of those, an actor and a writer by night, and a corporate grunt by day. Big business supports the arts in more ways than you realize. Sometimes the receptionist you see preoccupied with work is doing something far out of the realm of the corporate world.
Every morning, I would wake up way too early to take the A train to Chambers Street under the World Trade Center, then get out and walk a few blocks to work where the investment banking industry would give me a new appreciation for Kafka. On September 11th, 2001, I overslept a little.
A little.
Okay, so I was late to work again. Nothing worthwhile ever got done in the first hour or so anyway. So there was this rumble in the subway.
Hey buddy, you hear something?
What are you, a tourist? This is the subway. How can I tell one wormhole apart from any other?
I thought nothing of it. Sometimes I think I remember it only in retrospect. I got out of the train and took the stairs up one level. In that station, that meant I was still underground, where the A and the C and the 1 and the 9 trains all met, not far from where the E terminated. The newsstand that supplied my morning candy was not far, near the entrance to the mall that was directly under the towers. As I went through the turnstiles, I saw a crowd of people running toward me. There's a very specific kind of fear that comes from a screaming mass of people headed right at you. But that was only the beginning.
What happened?
Brian, get out of here!
A plane just crashed into the World Trade Center.
People were running everywhere. It was chaotic. I heard the words plane crash and thought some idiot in a single propeller plane had tried to pull a stunt and was going to make me even later for work than I already was. In the chaos of the station, I didn't know whether I was safer going up to the streets or down to the trains.
Hey buddy, you best move on.
I went to the lady in the token booth to find out what was happening and if I should head up or down. What's going on?
Go back down, get out of here.
That woman may have saved my life, because until I spoke to her, I was going to head for the streets. I would have been right under the towers. I hope she got out herself while there was still time. I got onto an uptown train. Being that it was still rush hour, trains were easy to come by. At that point, subways weren't affected yet. When I asked the conductor what was going on, she didn't know.
I heard something about a plane crash, but that was from you guys. If it doesn't affect us, we don't hear anything.
Do you know how bad it is?
Hey, like I said, all I know from you guys. If something just happened now, I won't know anything till the radio was, and that's only if it affects us.
I took the subway one stop uptown to Canal Street and got out just east of Broadway. At the staircase where I got out onto the street, my view of the towers was blocked by a building. I was clued in that the situation was far more serious than I had originally anticipated by the clouds of black smoke overhead. When I turned the corner onto Broadway and saw both towers in flames, I was in disbelief. What happened?
I don't know, man. They said a plane hit.
Did you see it?
No, I just got out of the subway.
How did one plane do that to both towers?
Somebody said it was 2 planes.
No way 2 planes messed up that bad.
I don't think it was an accident. I think it's terrorists. It's gotta be. When did the second plane hit?
Maybe there was no second plane. Look at it. Maybe the plane hit and spun up and hit the next building. I'm no expert, but I don't think planes do that.
At this point, you have to realize that I was still trying to get to work. You also have to realize that we in the streets knew less of what was going on than the people at home watching TV. Part of me knew that things were really bad, but it hadn't hit me that I was watching a whole lot of people die until later. I just kept looking at the towers and trying to get downtown. I was going against most of the foot traffic. Most people in the streets were staying where they were or going uptown. Most people going towards the towers had uniforms on. Cops, people in FBI jackets, and a couple uniforms I hadn't seen before. There were lines a dozen people long at all the payphones.
Hey, any luck with that thing?
Would I be on this line with you if I were having any luck?
After a couple dozen tries, I managed to get through to my family's answering machine. Mom, whatever you're seeing on TV, I'm safe, I'm okay, and I'm on the way to work. I'm safe, I'm okay, and I'm on the way to work. I kept going down Broadway. The sidewalks were crowded, but like I said, there were more people going uptown or standing still than going my way. The streets themselves were a steady stream of cop cars, ambulances, fire trucks, and these things that looked like spaceships on wheels. Mobile command centers, I think they're called. At this point, I could see things falling from the towers. I didn't know what they were. I thought it was some kind of debris. I learned later about the people throwing themselves from the burning floors. I try not to think about that now, even though the little falling specks play through my mind a lot.
I kept trying to get further downtown. I tried reaching work on my cell to tell them I was running late for obvious reasons. The cell, of course, was worthless. I started to have my doubts. People on the streets were talking to each other in an almost friendly way. This is looking pretty bad.
Yeah, but you gotta give respect to them architects, because them buildings are still standing.
They should have learned when they tried to blow it up a few years back that it wasn't coming down.
That's right. We built them strong here. But all those people, that's just wrong. How did the pilot screw up that bad?
I heard it was 2 planes. It's terrorists. It has to be.
How do you know?
I'm Israeli.
That's right. You people are used to it.
No, you never get used to it. At this point, no one in the streets had any clue the buildings would come down.
I wonder how long that'll take to fix.
At least a couple of years. What a shame. All the people.
We were in for a rude awakening. A couple things I saw made me reconsider my walk downtown. A woman walked by me like a zombie, tracks of dried tears on her cheeks, and her face blank. Another one was sobbing uncontrollably, being guided by a friend. All the people with cameras took me aback, but these days that sort of thing is expected. I just kept looking at the towers. I started to whisper the Kaddish. For those who don't know, that's the Jewish prayer for the dead. In terms of religious law, I am not sure it was the technically correct response, but I am not a religious person. It somehow seemed the only response that fit. I started to make my way uptown.
That's an act of war. Whoever did this, we're at war now.
But at war with who?
We'll find them.
As I got further north, every now and then there would be someone with a radio and a cluster of people around me. We heard about the Pentagon, we heard about the planes crashing in Pennsylvania, and we wondered what more to expect that day.
I heard gasps and the beginnings of a crashing sound, and every head in my view turned to face the tower. Or one of them, rather. I spun around to see a sight that's going to stay with me a long time. The two towers fell in very different ways. The first, from where I saw it happen, exploded out from the corners, floor by floor, and then folded in on itself once the corners weren't there to support it anymore. You have to understand the scale of these things to understand what I saw. Though each floor exploded and burst out fast, the whole thing still took some time to come down. From the streets, you could still see it happen, piece by piece. I was a good enough distance away to see the huge clouds of dust and debris swallowing up everything they passed. But far enough away to be a bystander.
I saw one man around my age collapse and sob before the tower had finished falling.
I saw people frozen in disbelief in the middle of the street.
There was an old man in a business suit, very dignified, very serious, marching uptown on Green Street and shouting orders.
Go home! Get out of here! Don't stay here! Go home!
That man woke a lot of people up. My walk uptown took on some urgency, as did those of the people around me. Not panic, but urgency. New Yorkers do not stampede.
That's it. No more twin towers. There's just one now. My kids are gonna ask what it was like with two.
This is horrible, but this is history. It's like being at Pearl Harbor. As I got further uptown, closer to NYU, I stopped to listen to the radio of a Jeep that was parked along the streets.
A situation that started bad just gets worse and worse and worse. The World Trade Center.
There was a man in his late 20s or early 30s standing by the open door looking at the remaining tower with his binoculars. There was nothing being said on the radio that I hadn't already heard or seen for myself. Can I borrow your binoculars?
Here you go, buddy.
What I saw was that the flames had gotten bigger and were spreading further. I was lucky in that by then I wasn't going to have to see people throw themselves from the windows anymore, and I wouldn't have to learn about that until later. I watched a helicopter come close to the tower, hoping to see it spray something that would put out the fires, hoping the fires wouldn't spread any more than they already had, and praying against all logic that I wouldn't have to see this one come down too. Do you think it'll stay up?
I hope so, man. Shame. Such a shame. All them women's. All them beautiful women's I'm never even gonna meet now. Such a shame.
I made my way through Soho to NYU. There were crowds of students mixed in with the business people now. And though we could still see the one remaining tower and the growing flames, we bystanders didn't feel as much in harm's way now.
That changed fast.
There was still one tower up. Tower 1, the one with the antenna. It had been hit closer to the top. It still stood, but you could see the flames getting higher and larger, even from a few miles away, just north of Houston Street.
We thought that since the hole seemed to cover less area, that the tower might weather the damage. Little did we know.
I was facing away from the tower.
You could only stand and stare so much at once. I had my cell phone out again. Maybe my mother was home. Maybe she'd be there to get the call this time. I dialed. There was a pause I was already familiar with when the phone tried to connect and was most likely going to fail. This time, though, instead of quiet beeps that signal a call failure, there was a loud, high-pitched feedback sound. I heard screaming all around me, and all anyone would look at was right behind me.
No!
I said before that the two towers fell in very different ways. I turned around to see the second one fall.
From where we were standing, It was like dominoes falling downwards.
Starting from the top, a floor would collapse onto the floor underneath it, which it would combine with to collapse a story lower, and so on.
There was this horrible rumbling sound, and a cloud of debris that expanded outward as it followed the collapse of the tower downward. Unlike the first tower, I didn't see this one go all the way down. I was spared that sight by the buildings in my immediate view.
But just like the first one, when something that big comes down, it doesn't happen instantly. We had to watch it happen piece by piece until the other buildings blocked our view.
A woman turned to me and told her story. She was very pale, and it seemed like she would tell everyone who would listen what had happened to her. Later on, I would be the same way. In a way, I'm doing that now.
All my neighbors are still under there. I live near there. All of my neighbors were watching it happen from the roof. I told them that it wasn't safe, that they should get away, but they wouldn't listen. They're all still there. No, they're all still there.
Don't worry, lady. I'm sure they got evacuated.
Oh no, I hope so. I don't believe they stayed. When I got to the streets, I just ran, and I didn't slow down until a few blocks away, and then the other one came down, and I was running, and then I saw this kid. Sorry, to me, anyone in their 20s is a kid. And I don't know if you know this about people in suits, but when they eat, they throw their ties over their shoulders. Well, he was throwing up, and his tie was about to slip over his shoulder, and so I went to him and pulled the tie back and put my arm around him, and well, he finished, and then he got up and he put his arm around me, and I asked him, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah." "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And then we both started running again. But everyone in my building is still under there.
I'm sure they all got out. I'm sure they all got out. Let's get you somewhere inside. You're in shock.
Do you really think they all got out?
I hope so, kid. I hope so.
I learned later about how everyone in the area was evacuated by police and fire departments. I was glad to know that guy was right, whether he knew it at the time or not. I fell in momentarily with a businessman and a student.
Hey, buddy, I'll give you $5 if I can use that cell phone to call my wife.
If this thing worked, I'd give it to you and not even think about taking your money. You're welcome to try it. I've been trying to call home since this all started.
I've got to get through to my wife. She hasn't heard from me since before we were evacuated.
I think we should try to get to a landline.
Listen, I live in the dorms right here. You guys can come in and use the phone if you want.
Thanks so much.
I've only been in New York for 3 weeks. We don't get this sort of thing at home.
We normally don't get this sort of thing in New York either. Where are you from?
New Orleans. Were you guys close?
I was a couple blocks away.
I was in the subway station underneath.
Wow. I'm glad you guys are okay at least. Come with me. I've got a phone and there's a big TV in the lounge. We can find out what's going on.
We started to follow her into a building. There was a huge crowd around the TV.
In an apparent terrorist attack, both World Trade Center towers have been destroyed, and the Pentagon is on fire.
I watched for a while. There were students everywhere, though a few people seemed out of place in the crowd of college kids. I was hoping the TV would tell me something I didn't already know, but nothing on the TV was either comforting or useful. Eventually, I was separated from my group. I realized I still had to get to a phone. I made my way to the arts building. There's a lounge on the first floor. Contingency plans had already been put in place, apparently. There was a huge crowd around a TV monitor. The cafe and the lounge had a sign up that Student Affairs was picking up the tab for coffee, tea, and water.
There were about as many of us in the lounge as on Broadway in front of the Tisch building. The view from the TV was a variation from view on Broadway. On the TV, you could see the disasters from cameras. On Broadway, you could see a huge pillar of smoke rising from a few short miles away.
Some professors tried to continue teaching classes though nothing had happened. But eventually, everyone realized something big was up, and we were all trying to find out what was going on.
My dorm was on Water Street, not far from Ground Zero. Pretty soon, I was going to get the news I was going to be homeless for a while.
I didn't think to call my family in California until much later, when I got home and there were a ton of messages on my machine. I hadn't been anywhere near it, so I didn't think anyone would be that worried. Of course, this was before the paranoia and bomb scares of the next few days and weeks.
At this point, all we were trying to do was figure out what was going on. We still couldn't grasp what was happening only a few short miles away.
Not seeing anyone I knew in the lounge, I took the elevator to a mostly empty office.
Can I help you?
Hi, I'm alumni. I was at the towers when they were being hit. I just want to use the phone.
Yeah, come here. Use this line. Do you need anything else?
Are you alright? Were you really close?
I'm about as alright as I can expect to be. Thanks so much. I was in the subway underneath as it was happening. I couldn't get above ground. Probably lucky. I took it uptown one stop and got out and saw it all from the streets.
Thank God you're okay.
They were wonderful to me. I realized then that I had this unbelievable need to tell people I was there, to talk about what I saw. The landlines were worthless too. All phones were still dead, though to my surprise, I could access the internet. There were already emails from friends around the country making sure I was alive.
You better be okay. Call me in Chicago now.
Please check in. I'm watching the news and I know you work around there. I just want to know you're alive.
I emailed everyone I could think of. I was there. I am alive. I'm shaken up, but I'm okay. I emailed some of my coworkers who did not share my habit of sleeping in and would have been a few blocks away at the office. It wasn't until I saw them days later that I would hear their stories. I was at the office for almost an hour. I got some messages back right away. One came from a close friend as I was growing restless.
I'm at the arts building in the university, in the studio on the 3rd floor. Come see me. So good to see you! How's your family? Are they all okay?
I left phone messages while both the towers were still up. I've been trying to call and I can't get through, and they haven't answered my emails yet. I emailed a friend in DC about calling them for me, and I don't know if he got through yet.
Come into the studio. We have food and coffee, and there are a bunch of computers. You can try and reach everyone from there.
Hey, what about you? Is everyone accounted for?
My friends who tipped downtown emailed me saying that they're all okay. Everyone else would have been far away.
It was so unbelievably good to see a friend. The kindness of strangers is one thing, but in crisis, you want the people who are closest to you to be there. I spent most of my afternoon in the design studios at New York University. It felt calm and quiet and safe compared to the streets. I had coffee and water and an internet connection to follow the news and keep in touch with the rest of the world. I exchanged emails with everyone I could reach and read the news as it was coming in. I got in touch with my family. Everyone was accounted for. My father was supposed to be flying in from a business trip that day. It was a big relief to know his plane was grounded. Later, I would hear some scary stories. I'd hear about near-death experiences. But then and there, I knew the people closest to me were safe. It wasn't until the middle of the afternoon that we left.
When was the last time you ate?
You know, with all this going on, I forgot I was even hungry. I didn't even have breakfast yet.
Let's go then.
While we were eating, someone managed to get through to me on my cell phone.
Oh, thank God you're alive. You scared the heck out of me. I was so worried you were trapped underneath. Are you okay?
Well, obviously I'm unemployed, but otherwise I'm okay.
Unemployed?
Yes.
How can you joke?
I'm joking because I'm still alive. Though I really am pretty sure I watched my job blow up a few hours ago. The next few days, I would get a lot of calls like that. There were other worries besides the job. I had deposited my last paycheck in a bank machine on the ground floor of the World Trade Center after business hours the day before. That was something that was going to need to be dealt with later on as well. At the moment, all I could think about was the food in front of me.
I'm supposed to go meet my boyfriend up at a friend's house in Hell's Kitchen. You should come with me if you don't have anywhere to go. Maybe we can try to get blood on the way up.
No one would have our blood. The blood banks were filled to capacity within hours of having been opened up. It would be like that for weeks. We walked uptown 50 blocks. The streets were empty of cars. This does not happen in New York. There were police everywhere, and I was glad to see them. Behind us, there was still that huge pillar of smoke. We spent some of the afternoon with friends, and my phone started working again. It took me 5 minutes to hear the messages, and I almost wore out my battery answering them all. One was from a friend who did not want to spend the night alone. She worked in a hospital uptown and spent the whole day waiting for victims that never came.
I didn't want to be alone either. I decided to stop by my place to shower and change before heading back down the island to see my friend. Phone service was slowly returning. My cell rang a few more times throughout the day. More calls like the last one. Making sure I was alive, seeing if I was okay. Wanting to hear what I saw. It was evening by the time I got onto the subway at Columbus Circle, almost halfway up the island from where I had originally gotten out under the gates. Under the towers. The gates were open. Free rides for all. It wasn't crowded, but there were people everywhere. All very quiet and somber. There was a fireman in the subway station, in full gear, covered with dust, and looking unbelievably tired. It was obvious where he had been. I wanted to come up to him, shake his hand, thank him for his work, for his bravery. But something in his face at that moment said that he just wanted to be left alone.
The next day, the streets were still empty of cars.
We couldn't get milk in grocery stores because no trucks could cross the bridges. Of course, there are no cows in Manhattan.
I'm sure you remember the front pages of all the newspapers.
They look a lot like what we saw from the streets. No one could talk about anything else.
Lots of businesses were closed.
There was a long, long line outside Red Cross headquarters.
Again, you had to wake up really early to give blood. And if you wanted to volunteer, forget it. They were turning doctors away. Doctors!
Most of us couldn't do much the next day. I woke up in my friend's apartment. She was already working at the hospital by then. I went to the Red Cross, was told they had as much blood as they could take, and filled out a volunteer form. From uptown, you couldn't see the smoke, though for weeks there would be a pillar of smoke marking where the towers had been. On my way home, there were already pictures of the missing hanging in every public place. Those pictures would be everywhere for a while. Many places were shrines in memory of those who were lost. Eventually, they got taken down, though in some places they were up for months. I got home early in the afternoon and gave in to the exhaustion of the day before. I slept till late the next morning. It didn't even occur to me to check in at work. Everything below 14th Street was sealed off. I stayed uptown in Washington Heights most of the next day. Everywhere I went, all anyone could talk about was the towers. I lived far enough uptown that I couldn't see the smoke, but images of the day before were still playing through my head. And then there were the bomb scares that kept happening. None where I lived, but they kept coming through on the radio and internet.
There was some at the Empire State Building almost right away, and that became a regular occurrence. Rockefeller Center too.
General paranoia was high. There was a fake Nostradamus prediction circulating about the next Great War, and twin brothers falling, and the great city in flames.
Ooh, spooky.
Want to hear spooky? I read that Nostradamus says you owe me money.
You'll get nothing from me.
In all seriousness, though, I jumped at every siren I heard.
In New York, you hear a lot of sirens. If you jumped at every one, you must have had plenty of exercise.
How about you when you heard a plane overhead a week later?
Let's not talk about that. You know, this would all be easier if there was something we could do.
Towards evening of the 14th, I received a very welcome call from an old friend.
Hey, you still want to get on the volunteer crew? She worked for the Red Cross. All their employees were drafted to work on relief crews. Fortunately, the supply of volunteers was unbelievably high in proportion to the jobs available, even for those with specialized skills.
We spent the entire night below the 14th Street line.
Going downtown in the middle of the night on September 14, 2001 was a quick drive. There was still no traffic.
Well, once we got downtown, there were layers and layers of security barricades. Though, of course, no one was going to stop a Red Cross vehicle.
The owner of a couple of Starbucks had donated lots of time and coffee to the cause. The canisters were going to be distributed between rescue workers.
The kid at the coffee shop said he'll brew his head off for us.
We made coffee until about 5 a.m.
Just doing something, anything to help, made us feel so much better.
At maybe 3 a.m., a woman walked up to the coffee shop with a poster.
Hey, I'm looking for my partner. Can I put a flyer here?
Sure.
Thanks, buddy. Listen, if you see him, call the number. Everyone's really worried.
Much of the city was wallpapered with posters like that. Walls and walls of missing people. Many places had flowers and candles as well. When the truck was full, there was a murmur among my crew about wanting to see Ground Zero.
What do you want to see that for? It's off limits anyway.
I have to see it, or at least try to.
Me too. I say we go for it. I was there. I saw them fall. I want to see.
The worst that can happen is we get turned away.
Okay, but for the record, I'm against this.
On the drive down, I noticed a box of teddy bears and stuffed dogs in the truck. Who are we feeding the teddy bears to, or are these for kids?
They're for the people in the shelters, kids and adults. If you just had your home blown up, you take what comfort you can get.
The little stuffed dogs didn't look quite as silly to me after that. Once we got to Ground Zero, it began to look more and more like a demilitarized zone. Past 14th Street, it was just police, lots of police, and police from all over the country. But now there were soldiers mixed in with the police and military vehicles. And the closer we got to the place itself, the more we knew we were beyond civilian territory.
We got really close, almost to the gates.
There was this massive pillar of smoke, and that smell that we were all learning to get used to and trying not to get used to got stronger. Sort of sour, like burnt concrete with something else mixed in that you didn't want to think about.
We were able to see debris and the remains of the lower walls of the towers through the smoke.
When we got near the gates, we were stopped by a police officer.
What are you doing here?
Delivering coffee. Would you like some? Fresh brewed.
You can pull in over there with the other support crews.
We drove by the other crews, made inquiries, and found there was no shortage of coffee at Ground Zero at the moment. We headed back to the Red Cross to deliver our 80-plus canisters of fresh coffee for redistribution. The crew I was working with was dissolved, and I got home at about 8 a.m. Later that week, I got a call from my employer. All the niceties of the situation were observed. That is, verification I was in one piece, physically and emotionally, and seeing if I had lost anyone in the attack. Not that these niceties were not heartfelt, but in the state of the city at the time, it was just good manners to check vital signs.
It seems Wall Street was to reopen that coming Monday. The day arrived and I got ready to return to work. It seems I was to be closer to the aftermath than I had thought. When the train reached the empty Chambers Street World Trade Center station where my story began, it passed through slowly and without stopping. Everyone became very quiet, and we all passed through in silence.
On the morning of the 18th, there were two kinds of uniforms all over the financial district. One army was in camouflage, the other, corporate casual.
There was a somber and determined mood in most offices.
A lot of stories of the week before were exchanged. We were only a few blocks away. We found out via the intercom, then stopped working and watched the entire thing from TV in the company cafeteria.
Not long after the buildings fell, we decided we couldn't stay. We had to wrap handkerchiefs around our mouths so we could breathe.
I saw a new Mercedes abandoned in the street. It was completely covered with dust and debris. We walked home in shock, not even stopping until we were in Midtown. My main office was in 1 Liberty. I couldn't go back and get my things. They were still worried that it might collapse.
1 Liberty would dominate the skyline in most cities. It's about half the size of one of the towers, which is saying a lot. Early on, you couldn't get anywhere near it. I remember spending most of September 10th there. Eventually, it was reopened.
Some people didn't come back to work that Monday. They said they'd never be able to go to the Wall Street area again. A few that said that came back within a few days. Others moved out in New York.
Pictures of the missing were plastered everywhere.
It was heartbreaking. A lot of people went past hope into denial, still thinking they would hear from their loved ones.
There were also posters about ethnic violence.
One thing that sticks out in my mind that just infuriates me as an American was a Sikh man standing at Penn Station handing out flyers explaining his ethnicity. It's bad enough that they have to deal with bigotry, but you would think the hate mongers could at least get their ethnicity straight.
In America today, that should not be necessary.
It's embarrassing. I apologize on behalf of the rest of the country.
What did he say?
He just smiled.
One vivid irony was the reversal of the situation between my friends and family here and in Israel. Just this once, everyone there was calling here to see that we had survived the terrorism, rather than vice versa.
Some of us that came back to work started getting sick.
The phrase World Trade Center cop entered our dictionaries.
Imagine going to work where not only are there unbelievable amounts of industrial waste in the air and fires still burning underground, but thousands of bodies decaying not far away.
Many people wore masks. There was that definite smell in the air that wouldn't go away for a while.
I could smell it rotten on some days, depending on the wind. I could also still see the smoke coming up for a long time after the fact.
Who knows what was in that smoke?
One day after coming back into work, I got dizzy.
Got pale too. Come here, sit down. Are you okay?
I think I need to go home.
She was back to work in a couple of days. There were all kinds of things in the air, in different combinations every day. One day, it could just randomly be the wrong combination for your body type, and you could just drop. Some firemen ended up retiring not long after from being disabled by what they inhaled at ground zero. We all went back to work, though. The best treatment for us all was to rebuild. Those who could, anyway. Some companies were hit hard. They stayed in business, but had to let most of their employees go.
I was one of them.
Me too.
People found ways to keep going, though. I, for one, am staying in New York. I lived through crime and pollution and ridiculous rents to be here. Damned if some terrorists are gonna scare me away.
We still have the best pizza in the world.
And I could never give up going to the theater here.
And the hot dogs on the streets. You can't forget the hot dogs. Where else are you gonna get a hot dog like that?
And the nightlife?
No place like it.
I'm staying.
I'm with you.
History came knocking really loud on everyone's door on September 11th. I had a close call. I still tell that story a lot.
I was there.
I got away.
I am shaken up, but okay. This is the flag of my country. I did not choose it. It was chosen for me by my parents not very long before I was born. I love my country. I have another flag and another country.
But the beauty of being here is that there is no conflict of interest in me saying that. Some people took issue with what this flag stands for.
Some men I never even met tried to kill me and throw my country into chaos.
They didn't kill me.
They did kill a lot of other people.
Lots of kids saw things from classroom windows that they should never have to see.
Some of those kids are still waiting for a mommy and daddy or brother or sister who's not ever going to come home.
I came home clean.
Other people lived covered in dust and debris that would wash away far sooner than the shock and the trauma.
Other people had closer calls than I did. I was just a bystander, really.
Not long after, some people were afraid to leave their houses. Some people are so scared they're thinking of leaving New York.
I will not leave.
I will live my life.
I will rebuild.
We will mourn the dead and heal the injured.
We will have justice, and we will have peace.
The term "and justice for all" has implications that cannot be ignored here.
I hear you there.
I will not live in fear.
We will live our lives.
We will rebuild.
We will not live in fear.